headliner.
What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today. We're talking about the quarterbacks we're going to start and sit for Week 11 fantasy football, but we have a few bigger name guys, probably a lot of guys that have been in your lineups here recently that you're going to be without due to bye weeks. We got Tom Brady, Geno Smith, Tua, Trevor Lawrence. They're all on bye. They're not going to be useful for you here this week, which means there's probably a few guys that we sit normally that may find themselves in the start column this week to get you one of those bye week fill-ins if need be. We're not wasting any more time though. There's timestamps down below. Hit the like button for some timestamps. And here we go. Thursday Night Football, Tennessee Titans, Green Bay Packers. And we'll kick it off right here with Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans, who is coming off his best game of the year since Week 1. He had 255 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions against a Denver defense that's actually pretty good against opposing quarterbacks. It's only his third game all year, though, in which he had multiple touchdowns. And really, what's kind of odd to me, he hasn't been running as much this year as he has in years past. Now, we know this isn't going to be some high-powered passing offense. They're only throwing the ball on average 24 times a game. That ranks 30th in the NFL. Now they're going up against the Green Bay Packers, another solid team against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 13.7 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But right now, there are 8 members of the Green Bay defense that are currently questionable to play. They are banged up in Green Bay, so maybe the matchup won't be quite as bad this week for Ryan Tannehill. But when it comes to injuries and the Tennessee Titans, most of their injuries as well on the defensive side of the football. Now, center Ben Jones, he is questionable to play as well. That's one name we're paying attention to. But we do have Treylon Burks back, which is good. And I also love that NWI, that's what I'm going to call him because I have no idea how to say, is it Akeen, Nick Westbrook? People are just going to tell me I mispronounce it down below anyway. So going forward, it's NWI for me. I love that he's finding those big plays, but this is still a Derrick Henry first offense, and Ryan Tannehill is going to be a sit for me here this week. His opponent, Aaron Rodgers, who is currently quarterback 14 overall, coming off his first 3-touchdown passing game of the season, thanks to his connection with Christian Watson. That took long enough to happen. Don't you find it amusing how people are out there trying to victory lap Christian Watson because they were so high on him all offseason and totally ignoring the fact that he hasn't really done anything for 9 weeks until last week? Kind of crazy how that works out. But what else I find a little bit odd, in that game last week in which he had those 3 touchdown passes, he only threw the ball a total of 20 times. That is not what we're used to in an Aaron Rodgers offense. Now, on the year, averaging 34.6 attempts per game, 17th in the league, kind of middle of the pack. Going up against Tennessee, good matchup. They allow the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 20.2 per game. When it comes to injuries here, like I said, the entire defense is pretty banged up. Most of the offensive line currently on the injury report. Most of the wide receivers on the injury report. Looks like we could get Randall Cobb back at some point here. And even Aaron Rodgers himself dealing with that thumb injury still. Now, does that mean that none of these guys are going to play this week? No. They're questionable. It's a Thursday night game. They're trying to give them as much rest as they can on a short week. I expect a lot of these guys to still play. But Aaron Rodgers is spreading the ball around. It's not just Christian Watson, but he's the one being the main beneficiary of the defense really not being able to focus on just one spot. We need a healthy Aaron Jones. We need a healthy running game. And if that can happen, Christian Watson could go off here. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and start Aaron Rodgers on Thursday Night Football. But now let's move over to Sunday, the Chicago Bears and Atlanta Falcons. And don't look now, but Justin Fields is inside the top 5 overall quarterbacks on the season. That is absolutely crazy. If you look at his last 5 weeks, he's the quarterback 1 overall in fantasy football and has scored 36 more points than the next closest quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. Justin Fields is going slap off right now, has 14 touchdowns over those last 5 games, and is carrying people each and every week to fantasy victories. Now, they're still not throwing the ball a ton, but when they are throwing it, they're very productive throws, right? All of a sudden, we're starting to see these touchdowns rack up. Cole Kmet becoming a huge member of this offense. Justin Fields hasn't eclipsed 28 pass attempts in a game so far this year. However, is currently 6th overall in the NFL in rushing yards. That's what we'd like to see for fantasy football. Now they're going up against Atlanta. They allow the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 19.3 per game. We know there's no Khalil Herbert, so we're going to see more David Montgomery, but we may also see more rushing from Justin Fields. Maybe not more rushing. How about continued rushing? Because the guy's already running crazy. Offensive tackle Tevin Jenkins also questionable to play in this game, but this kid is doing almost everything right now. If you go back and you watch film on Justin Fields over these last 4 to 5 weeks, for the tools that he has to work with, he's doing the most possible with them. His anticipation and his quick decision making right now is at an elite level. I'm talking like enough to rival Lamar Jackson type elite level with the way that Justin Fields is playing. Is he going to be a pocket passer throwing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns a game? No. But for fantasy football purposes, this kid is the real deal. And of course, he's going to be a start. We got to ride the hot wave here. What about his opponent, Marcus Mariota? Hey, look at that. I mean, last week I told people to start Marcus Mariota, and it actually worked out for the first time, I think, all year. The dude's basically been my kryptonite in 2022, and I couldn't figure it out. It was an ugly game, but it still wasn't a bad game nonetheless for Marcus Mariota. But we need these multiple touchdown games, right? That's what we always look for quarterbacks. We mention this a lot. A quarterback that can average 2 touchdowns a week more than likely is going to be a reliable, safe starter for you, but they don't throw the ball a whole lot in Atlanta, right? Averaging only 23 attempts per game. That's 31st in the league. There's only 32 teams. Now they're going up against Chicago. Kind of middle of the pack defense, allowing right around 16.5 fantasy points per game. Still multiple offensive linemen missing here, but more than anything, it's the defense that's still banged up in Atlanta once again. Now, he hasn't had back-to-back games with multiple touchdowns since weeks 2 and 3. The Bears are easier to run on than they are to throw on, and we know that Atlanta wants to use all 3 running backs in this backfield. It also means that maybe Marcus Mariota himself could find some room to run, and we could really use a rushing touchdown this week to maybe go along with just 1 passing touchdown, Marcus, and he could be a low-end start, a bye week fill-in. If it wasn't for the bye weeks, I don't know if I'm really on the Marcus Mariota bandwagon. How about we go to Carolina and Baltimore? And here we go once again with the Bake Show. Baker Mayfield under center for the Carolina Panthers. And more than anything, I want to know, is anyone out there really interested in starting Baker Mayfield in fantasy football this week? I'm genuinely curious if anybody scrolled through the names of what was available for a bye week fill-in, and when they came to Baker, was it even a thought? Because I really don't think it should have been for almost anyone. He's only played 31 total snaps over the last 5 weeks of the season. All of that came in week 9 in that blowout game against the Cincinnati Bengals. However, in that game, did have 2 garbage time touchdowns. So at least he put up some points when he was on the field. They only throw the ball 28 times a game, 28th in the NFL. Now they're going up against Baltimore, who allows the 11th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 19 per game. We know PJ Walker has already been ruled out, so it's going to be Baker Mayfield. Wide receiver Rashad Higgins questionable to play, but that's not that big of a deal. There can always be a chance at a Bake Show. But on the road in Baltimore against a Ravens team coming off the bye week seems to be a little bit more of a bake sale for me, and I'm going to go ahead and sit Baker Mayfield. How about Lamar Jackson, though? No, we're not sitting Lamar Jackson, even though it hasn't really been the typical Lamar-type season. But the bye week is always a good time to reset, rest up, and really make a run second half of the season. He's failed to throw for over 200 yards now in 2 of his last 3 games, and only eclipsed 60 yards rushing 1 out of the last 3 weeks as well. That's where the problem is really lying, because they're only throwing the ball on average 28 times a game. However, he is getting right around 10 carries per contest, just not doing a whole lot with them as of late. Going up against the Panthers, they allow the 15th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks at 17. Now, Gus Edwards, Mark Andrews, Deshaun Jackson, all these guys are questionable to play. However, they're all trending in the right direction and should be available here this week. Now, Carolina can be had on the ground. They are a lot easier to run on than they are to throw on. And if Lamar is without a few of the weapons potentially, maybe we see a little uptick in that rushing game once again here for Lamar Jackson. Doesn't really seem to matter. There's no way we can really afford to sit Lamar. He's going to be a start. How about the Cleveland Browns, Buffalo Bills? And as much as I don't hate Jacoby Brissett, he's a top 20 quarterback. The ceiling's just too low every single week, right? I mean, he hasn't had 2 touchdowns in a game since week 3. Even though we're starting to see him run the ball a little bit more, has had 5 or more carries now in back-to-back games and hasn't had an interception since week 6. We know they're going to continue to run the football a lot, though. They're throwing the ball 32 times a game, 21st in the NFL. Now they're going up against Buffalo. They allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at only 13.2 per game. Still missing multiple offensive linemen and Joe Haeg and Jedrick Wills questionable to play this week. Guard Michael Dunn also questionable to play. But what about David Njoku? He could come back, but it's kind of looking like a stretch at this point for him to make it back this week. But here's the X factor for me. It's going to be colder than a penguin's taint in Buffalo this weekend. More than likely, there's a good chance of snow on the ground, and I don't know if I want to trust a passing game led by Jacoby Brissett in that kind of weather, so he's going to be a sit. Josh Allen, we never sit Josh Allen, right? Even if you wanted to sit him last week coming off the elbow injury, aren't you glad you didn't? Because he still went out there and put up 23 fantasy points for you. He threw the ball 43 times. I really expect him to be questionable, probably for multiple weeks, all week long, missing practices, limited in practices. I think we just need to get used to seeing that. But if he's playing last week, unless there's anything that really worsens in that elbow, I have to think that he's out there each and every week. Now, one area of concern, does have 6 interceptions now over his last 3 games. Going up against Cleveland, they allow on average 16.4 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. This defense still banged up, but like I said, I don't think you can ever really sit Josh Allen. If he's active, if he's playing, he's more than likely in your lineup. How about the Washington Commandos, Houston Texans? Really not overly interested in either one of these guys. Taylor Heinicke did just beat the Philadelphia Eagles, but he only scored 7 fantasy points in that contest. And even though there's rumors that Carson Wentz could come back this week, I have to think they stick with the Heine. How can you go against Taylor Heinicke right now? He's had 2 total touchdowns in every other start that he's had this year, with the exception of the Philadelphia Eagles game just last week, and they're 3-1 with him under center and climbing back into division contention. How can you take that and go back to Carson Wentz? Plus, the guy's on an airplane using a trash can for a beer cooler. That right there is enough to make that dude the starting quarterback for my franchise if it was my decision. Now they're going against Houston, though. Houston is pretty good against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 13.7 fantasy points per game, 6th fewest in the NFL. No other major new injury concerns here. I love the Heine, but I really expect them to utilize the running game. We just saw Brian Robinson last week with 26 carries, and we still had Antonio Gibson involved in scoring touchdowns as well. Now they get the Houston Texans, a team that's way easier to run on, so I'm going to go ahead and sit the Heine and sit Taylor Heinicke. For Davis Mills, I'm going to go ahead and say something, and you may think this is a little bit crazy, but if Davis Mills were to play somewhere else, this dude would be getting so much more love from the NFL. If you put him in New England, if he goes to New England instead of Mac Jones, this guy is a weekly fantasy start. But he's in Houston, and he's got a bunch of banged up wide receivers. He's got wide receivers that don't want to be there. The guy has 6 touchdowns over his last 4 weeks played, 300 plus yards passing in 2 of the last 4 games, and is still throwing the ball almost 33 times a contest. Now they're going up against Washington, who allows the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 18 per game. He's still banged up on the offensive line as well. Does Brandon Cooks even want to be there? It was great to have Nico Collins back, though. They just brought in Amari Rodgers, who was released from the Green Bay Packers. That could be a future weapon. Not somebody I'm really concerned about here this week. I love Davis Mills. I wish he could get a better opportunity in this league to really put up some better numbers, but for now, he's going to remain a sit. The Philadelphia Eagles and Indianapolis Colts now. I think we're going to go ahead and start Jalen Hurts, right? I'm pretty sure we should. Even in a week where Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles struggled overall and lost, he still had 3 total touchdowns, which is great. What's worrisome is why all of a sudden has the rushing numbers just completely declined. He hasn't had more than 30 yards rushing since week 5. We're going into week 11. I get it. I know. I guess I don't want to be greedy because the guy's still out there producing overall. Just kind of curious as to why those rushing numbers declined so rapidly because the guy was running all over the place to start the year. Now they're going against the Colts. They haven't been bad against opposing quarterbacks, allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at only 15.8 per game. The loss of Dallas Goedert or Goddard, because right now I guess I can't feel fancy if he's not healthy. That's going to hurt this offense a little bit. He was a great outlet for Jalen Hurts, but maybe now we see more Devontae Smith on a weekly basis. But with the rushing numbers kind of being a little bit lower, no Dallas Goedert, I'm going to drop down the X factor here, but it's not enough. He's still going to be a start. His opponent, Matt Ryan, in his first game back after being benched for no good reason, had 220 yards passing and a touchdown. Not great, but the overall offense is going to be better with Matt Ryan. We discussed this last week as well, and we will see this going forward. Matt Ryan may not be an elite level quarterback. He may not go out there and put up 300 yards and 3 touchdowns every week, but the offense as a whole is a lot better for fantasy football purposes for the likes of Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, Jonathan Taylor. That's where we need Matt Ryan. Under center, they're throwing the ball almost 38 times a game. Now they're going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, though not an easy matchup. They allow the second fewest points to opposing quarterbacks at only 10.9 per game. That is not what we like. And as much as we love to have Matt Ryan back under center here for fantasy football, I'm not tempting him in my lineup in this matchup this week against Philadelphia. How about the Jets and the Patriots? Zach Wilson versus Mac Jones. And I'm not excited for this one really at all when it comes to the quarterback position. Now, coming off the bye week, he did pretty good, Zach Wilson did, against the New England Patriots back in Week 8. 355 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, over 20 fantasy points. Not bad. However, he's failed to at least throw the ball over 30 times in 4 of the 6 starts this season. We know that New England is easier to throw on than they are to run on because they're allowing 17 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but this team is still annihilated on the offensive line. Corey Davis still not practicing. He's questionable to play. And the only time all year long where Zach Wilson would have been a good start was the last game against the New England Patriots. But now they travel to New England against the Patriots, who are also coming off their bye week. You gave Bill Belichick another week to prep for this team in which he's already seen this year. Now, the stars are not aligning for this one. I'm not going to start Zach Wilson this week. For Mac Jones, right now, he's barely inside the top 25 at the position. He hasn't had multiple touchdowns in a game so far this year, and has only thrown for over 300 yards once all season long. In their last meeting, had 194 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. That was back in Week 8, only throwing the ball 29 times a game. Going up against the Jets defense, pretty solid, 15.8 points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Damian Harris, questionable. Devontae Parker, still questionable. There's just not enough upside here for me. We haven't really seen Mac Jones go out there consistently. Now, could he go on another late season run, kind of similar to what we saw last year? Potentially. But until we see it, no interest in starting in fantasy football. How about the Rams and the Saints? We'll start off with Matthew Stafford as of right now, but it could end up being John Wolford here once again because he's still inside the concussion protocol as Matthew Stafford, which is kind of weird, right? He missed last week. Not a whole lot really reported on Matthew Stafford. We've even seen interviews with Sean McVay where he's saying, I really don't even know either. That's odd. Like, that just doesn't seem right for a franchise-style quarterback in Matthew Stafford, especially on a team that just lost arguably their best offensive weapon in Cooper Kupp. Now, the Saints are allowing right around 17 fantasy points per game, right around the league average. I mentioned no Cooper Kupp. Multiple injuries on the offensive line, a few of which are already ruled out. Stafford still in the concussion protocol. There's a lot going on in this situation, but he hasn't really been fantasy startable all year long, and that's with Cooper Kupp. I don't think I want to tempt it without Cooper Kupp, even if he does play. Matthew Stafford, John Wolford, both going to be sits. And honestly, I kind of feel the same way about Andy Dalton and the New Orleans Saints. Do we have to worry about a potential quarterback change here and then bringing back in Jameis Winston? Now, as of right now, it sounds like it's going to be Andy Dalton, but that can change in a moment's notice. Now they're going up against the Rams. They allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 14.5 per game. There are 4 offensive linemen that are still hurt for the New Orleans Saints. Mark Ingram also still questionable. And at any time in this game, if Andy Dalton struggles, if he starts, they could switch and go back to Jameis Winston. That is not a headache you want for fantasy football, and we're not wasting any more time. We're not going to start Andy Dalton right now. The Detroit Lions and New York Giants. Jared Goff, he's just not where he was at to start the season fantasy-wise, right? Only one game in the last 5 weeks with multiple passing touchdowns, averaging right around 34 attempts per game. Going up against New York, they're actually pretty good against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 15.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Now, we're still dealing with multiple injuries on the offensive line in Detroit. We have Josh Reynolds questionable to play. DJ Chark designated to return. Does that happen right away? We don't know for sure. And Jameson Williams is saying he could come back after Thanksgiving. But on top of that, I'm still not 100% sold that DeAndre Swift is 100% healthy either. So we're dealing with some injuries right now in Detroit. Also dealing with a lot of inconsistencies and not seeing a lot of solid performances back-to-back games from Jared Goff. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown, but he's not enough to do it by himself each week, so Jared Goff is going to be a sit. For Daniel Jones, I said a few weeks ago I would never trust Daniel Jones again after he did me dirty. And here we are. He's listed as a start for me again. Oh, please, don't let this happen again. There's bye weeks, right? When I said we had to have some of these names kind of pop up into that start category, one of them is going to be Daniel Jones, and it's really due to the matchup going up against the Detroit Lions, because this is just a roller coaster every single week from Daniel Jones. There's no rhyme or reason as to when he's going to score or not score points. He will literally get you 2 touchdowns or no touchdowns every single game. Not throwing the ball a lot, 29th in the league in pass attempts per game. The Lions, though, allowing over 23.7 fantasy points per contest. That is most in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks. Now, offensive tackle Evan Neal, still questionable, and so is tight end Daniel Bellinger, but that was the case last week. There is no safety here, but with the matchup, with the potential upside, with the bye weeks that we're facing, Daniel Jones is going to be a start. Which will now take us down to Denver for the Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders, and for Derek Carr, I know there's a lot of people that dislike Derek Carr, but this dude is just being put through the ringer. He's quarterback 18 overall in fantasy football, but does have at least 250 yards passing and 2 touchdowns in back-to-back games, which is not bad fantasy-wise, right? Sure, the Raiders' offense as a whole, as a team, not looking good, but fantasy-wise hasn't been horrible the last 2 games for Derek Carr. They're throwing the ball a lot. 9th most in the league at 36.2 times per contest, but now they're going up against Denver. And this is the best team in the NFL, statistics-wise, against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 10.8 fantasy points per game, unless your name is Ryan Tannehill in Week 10, and then you have no issues. Now, these two have faced off before. Carr had 188 yards passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions back in Week 4 against this same team, still without Renfro and Waller, and it may be ugly in real life, but fantasy-wise, he's still putting up okay numbers. If you had a Tua, a Brady, a Geno, he's a potential bye-week fill-in. Carr is decent when it comes to fantasy football despite the struggles in Las Vegas. I'm not excited to start him this week. This is not one of those situations where I have much confidence in him, but if you need a bye-week fill-in, at least we know the ceiling's a little bit higher. The touchdowns could be there with Devontae Adams, so he's listed as a start. Russell Wilson is not listed as a start. I don't care if he takes 4 bye weeks this season, probably still not going to be a start, because as disappointing as this offense has been, it's actually going to get worse now with all the injuries that they're racking up. 1 game all year for Russ with multiple touchdowns. Only threw for over 300 yards 1 time all season long, and that was back in Week 1. Throwing the ball on average 35 times a game, going up against the Raiders, who allow the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 22.6 per game, and I'm still not excited to start Russell Wilson. Jerry Jeudy is questionable, KJ Hamler already out, and they have 3 other offensive linemen that are questionable to play. The 2022 thing to happen here would be for Russell Wilson to go the hell off this week. And if he does, cool. It's going to happen on my bench. If anything, once we see that turnaround, maybe then going forward, we can find something to hold on to and trust weekly, because we haven't seen it as of yet, and there's no safety with Russell Wilson. He's a verge sit for me. which means we go down to Minnesota now for the Vikings and the Cowboys, a game that I'm really looking forward to watching here this week. Now, Dak, he's picking up steam. His numbers have increased each of the last 3 games, and last week had 265 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions against the Green Bay Packers, but we really started to see the bump in passing volume as well. They were working him back slowly. It seemed like they weren't throwing the ball a whole lot in Dallas. He had 46 pass attempts in Week 10, the most he's had so far in a game this season. I think it's all systems go in the passing game for the Dallas Cowboys. Now they're going up against the Vikings, who allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 19.4 per game. Zeke still questionable. Offensive line still waiting on the return of Tyron Smith. But this could be one of those back and forth contests where we see a lot of scoring. And if that's the case, Dak Prescott putting up some fantasy points, he's going to be a start. And really, I can do the same thing for Kirk Cousins, right? He's currently sitting at quarterback 12. Just had his first game, though, without at least 2 touchdowns since Week 4. However, still threw for 357 yards against the Buffalo Bills. That's 17-plus points now in 5 straight ball games for fantasy football. You can't really beat that, right? It's all reliable Kirk Cousins. Oh, I forgot. I'm supposed to be doing my dance here. I would take my shirt off, but that's probably not a good idea. Anyway, they're still throwing the ball a lot, 40 times a game, 5th most in the NFL. Dallas been pretty freaking good against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 14.4 fantasy points per game, 7th fewest in the league. One of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, though, is questionable to play with Christian Darrisaw there. But when you got Justin Jefferson, anything is possible, right? Just chuck it down the field. Jefferson will do something with it. I'm hoping for that shootout, so we're starting Kirk Cousins as well. All right. I don't know if I want to do that in a video anymore. That's 2 weeks in a row, and then I get out of breath, and then it's just not enjoyable for me, but there you have it. All right, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh now. Joe Burrow, coming off the bye week, quarterback 5 overall in fantasy football, has had at least 2 touchdowns in all but 1 game this season, and threw for 338 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in Week 1 against this defense of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now on the year, we know they're throwing the ball a lot, 37 times a game, 8th most in the NFL. The Pittsburgh Steelers allowing just under 20 fantasy points per game. He's still missing Jamar Chase as Joe Burrow, and that's a thing, right? That matters. However, still has Tyler Boyd, still has T. Higgins, still has Joe Mixon, still has Hayden Hurst, still has plenty of options out there to throw to. Coming off the bye week against a divisional opponent, I'm starting Joe Burrow. His opponent, Kenny Pickett. Nope, I'm not on this bandwagon yet. He only has 2 passing touchdowns since Week 4. And actually, here's a crazy stat for you. He has just as many tackles over that time span from people that have intercepted his balls. I don't want to start a quarterback that has just as many tackles as he does touchdowns. That does not sound enjoyable for fantasy football. Even though the volume's going to be there, going to throw the ball a lot. They're going up against Cincinnati. They allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Najee, questionable. Not that really hurts Kenny Pickett because he doesn't throw him the damn ball anyway. Honestly, I'm just passing here until we see an uptick in production from Kenny Pickett. We haven't seen a whole lot all year long. I don't know why it would happen all of a sudden this week, which will take us to Sunday Night Football, Kansas City Chiefs, Los Angeles Chargers, and a showdown of Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, who hasn't been very fancy as of yet, but we'll start it off with Patrick Mahomes, and I'm looking forward to this, right? This dude is just cooking as of late. Had 331 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception just last week. We know they're going to be a throw-first team. We're not seeing a whole lot from this running game. Sure, Isaiah Pacheco didn't have a bad game last week, but really this backfield has done a whole lot of nothing almost all season long. But now they get a matchup going up against the Chargers. They allow only just about 16 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. But when these two faced off back in Week 2, Mahomes threw for 235, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Now I cannot ignore the fact that he has some weapons that are banged up. MVS is questionable. Mecole Hardman is questionable. Juju is questionable. That matters. However, this is where the signing of like a Kadarius Toney, still having Travis Kelce, that really helps this team. If we're without multiple weapons, maybe we see a little bit more Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That would seem like the Andy Reid thing to do. But it's Patrick Mahomes. It's prime time against Justin Herbert in a divisional matchup. Here's a little bonus on top, though. How about this? He's also rushed for over 100 yards in the last 2 games combined. So those are bonus points, right? To get about 5 points a game from rushing from Patrick Mahomes on top of everything he does in the passing game, sign me up for that. How about Justin Herbert, though? I mean, he's struggling a little bit more, right? He's really missing Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Only one game over the last 5 with multiple touchdowns is not what we want from Justin Herbert, but we know they're still going to throw the ball a lot, especially to Austin Eckler out of the backfield going up against Kansas City. They're going to have to throw the ball because they're probably going to be trailing, and Kansas City allows over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. We mentioned Keenan Allen and Mike Williams still being hurt, but so is Gerald Everett. He's questionable to play. The ceiling, it may not be what it used to be, but in a matchup like this is where the stars shine, and I don't know if I can afford to sit Justin Herbert with 4 starting quarterbacks that are on bye this week. Justin Herbert going to find himself in the start column, and then Monday Night Football, the San Francisco 49ers against my own Arizona Cardinals. Damn you, Brandon Ayuk. I have not forgiven you for what you did in the end zone last week by dropping that Jimmy G touchdown pass. That would have given Jimmy G 5 straight games with multiple touchdowns. But no, you had to let the ball go right through your hands. Woosah. Okay, I'll get over it eventually. Now, the Chargers defense didn't play half bad in that game if you watched it, but they're going to continue to throw the ball, not as much as a lot of these other teams, 31 times a game. But when you have the success in the running game with CMC and Elijah Mitchell, that's to be expected. But that's why a lot of these playmakers in this offense really exceed with yak yards, right? Yards after the catch, and that's what continues to make Jimmy G a viable option. Now they're going against Arizona. They allow the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 19.7 per week. No other new major injuries of concern here for the 49ers, and with all the weapons he has in a decent matchup, I gotta start Jimmy G once again, which will then take us to the Arizona Cardinals. And I have Colt McCoy listed here because it sounds like we may not have Kyler Murray once again. They want him to get that hamstring back to 100% health. And I don't blame them. At this point, they're really not competing for the division. It's in the hands of the San Francisco 49ers and Seattle Seahawks. Arizona's just trying to not totally implode at this point. But Colt McCoy didn't look half bad last week. 26-37 for 238 and a touchdown against the Rams in a road win. I'll take that, sure. They lost Cooper Kupp. They didn't have Matthew Stafford, but still, as a Cardinals fan, I will take that. But we know the Cardinals are going to have to throw a lot because more than likely they're going to be trailing. But they're going against San Francisco, who allows the 9th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 14.5 per game. This offensive line is still really hurting, and what they're going to want to do is run the ball successfully with James Conner to try to keep the ball away from the San Francisco 49ers. We did get word that Hollywood Brown, he's close to returning off the IR as well, so that is good news. This is just not one of those matchups that I want to tempt in fantasy football in Week 11. Much better option, so I'm going to sit Colt McCoy. Well, there you have it, my starts and sits for the quarterback position Week 11 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you some information to help make your decisions a little bit easier here in Week 11. If I did, do me a favor, hit that like button, consider subscribing if you haven't already, because we're talking football all year long. We're having a great time doing it. Thank you so much for the support. We just crossed 175,000 subscribers, on our way to 200K, baby. Appreciate all the support out there. I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.